Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We've got some great panelists on this talk today to talk about Web3 game design. So welcome, and maybe you guys can introduce yourselves and let us know a bit about what you're doing. I'll let you go from there.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm the CEO at BlockUS. We build the all-in-one ecosystem infrastructure platform for Web3 gaming. So we support studios to incorporate Web3 features in a seamless way using an API product.
I'm Francis. I'm a head of economy at Shrapnel. We're a AAA first-person shooter that utilizes user-generated content so they can make skins, maps, and then also generate revenue from the success of their own content.
My name is Ben. I'm one of the co-founders at Mighty Bear Games. We are a multi-platform, cross-play games development studio. We've worked with Apple Arcade and Disney in the past, and we're now working on a Web3-powered battle royale called Mighty Action Heroes.
Cool, thank you very much. So is Web3 game design fundamentally different from the prior era of gaming design? So in this panel, we're going to have a discussion about the impact of Web3 on game designers and how game designers have evolved their approach to game development based on new technologies. So just to start us off, what is the impact of Web3 on game design from your perspectives?
Yeah, I think, at its core, game design is just putting in some kind of system that someone interacts with to make them perform a certain behavior. So all that Web3 does is it adds an additional set of systems that you can use to incentivize people to perform certain actions. It's just we have to take into consideration more so that real value is at stake. So that changes massively how people behave inside like an ecosystem, because if there is the perception that you could lose something, your behaviors tend to switch. So you tend to stop taking as many risks, or you have the complete other end. So you tend to split the crowd a lot with the people that are extremely risk averse and the people that are extremely risk on. That there isn't really much in the middle. So you have to make sure that the behaviors in the ecosystem that you want to drive actually suit both of those, and it can be a sustainable mix of the two. So I think for us that's the main difference, because we're an extraction shooter, so people can lose all of their value and they can trade it between each other. And I think that's the biggest trade-off that we've had to kind of look at when we're designing everything.
Well, that's an amazing approach. So we're a little bit different in the sense where Web3 has really influenced the way we make games in general, like kind of more than the economy, the approach to designing the economy, but also the way we work with the community, which is not something that we've done before as traditional, we're classic Web2 developers. So that was a first for us to be, community first, having community as stakeholders as well, because we had a few ecosystem and game collections that we launched, NFT collections. And that completely changes the kind of the dynamics of building a game. It's been very, very different for us. So the way we approach generally like the Web3 component is learning from the community what mattered to them, proposing ideas, discussing, incubating those ideas with the community, and implementing them. The end result right now from a pure Web3 perspective is that we have a fairly traditional battle royale experience that is free to play with a layer of essentially higher grade, higher tier assets that you can trade if you want to. That's not a requirement. It comes as a way to elevate the experience. It's an opt-in kind of experience. And that's the way that's changed the way we worked on economy.
Yeah, we're a platform, so we see a bunch of different games, and I think what we see the most is the biggest change is Web3 just adds a whole economy piece to the complexity of designing a game, which is really interesting, just opens up a new door. And I talk a lot about the social gaming continuum in the sense that the next big social platform is not a Facebook or Instagram or a TikTok. It's going to be this interactive 3D constantly interacting platform, right? Which is just a game. So social is coming to gaming, and then economies are by nature like very social. Even if you don't let people, even if you have a single player game, if you have an economy, then the players are interacting by buying and selling to each other, right? So just managing that is very new to most game studios, where especially on mobile or free to play, where you have a single player experience and you get people to complete a certain task, incentivize them to have retention is like very, very different. So that mindset shift has been really interesting. And a bunch of challenges come from that. It's like, oh, we have a Discord server and now there's like a airdrop scammer. Like, what is this? But yeah.
It happened.
Yeah.
You mentioned a bit about community, and how do you kind of balance between like the Web3 gaming community and the traditional gaming community in the design of your game?
That's a very good question. We're learning how to do that. I think the main piece for us has been education. So we have to be very open, very early about what we're thinking, the deeper reasoning behind introducing certain features, about things that we would not do as well. Like why don't we do this, whatever feature that is seen somewhere else and people are pitching to us, and we have to explain those things. It's very time consuming, but it's really worth it because you create alignment on, why we're doing these things. And there are less and less, let's say, minute questions and bigger picture questions that are coming up slowly, which is really great, building a game for that.
Yeah, we've noticed that there's a lot of kind of education that we need to give to the folks, because to make something look pretty and good, like to do the first 90% of game design is not that slow.
Yeah.
It's the last 10% where you're perfecting it and actually making it entertaining, which is the where most of the meat is. So we're like 90% of the way through on the surface, but then we still got a little bit to go. It's just what they see is like this finished, polished product because it looks good and it seems to play good, but it's just not fully there to be at least what we'd call a AAA experience. So there's just that like tempering of expectations of, hey, you've seen all this great stuff, but we need to educate you on why it's still going to take a while to finish the product.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, from us, we see a lot of like, I think the low, medium, high player dynamic, both Web 2 and Web 3, right? So it's like the low players are those that farm gold in RuneScape from the earliest days, and today they do airdrop farming, right? They don't really care if you're Web 2 or Web 3. They're like, and they don't care about onboarding friction or whatever it takes to get that airdrop. They're like, okay, cool. Web 3 game sounds good to me. The medium players on both sides aren't that active, in all honesty. In Web 3 as well, there's a lack of medium players, which I think is what we're all trying to grow. But then the high players in Web 2 are very vocal against Web 3. It's like, these games suck. But the high players in Web 3 are just like, they just get it. Like, they're the degens, right? They have a Milady, they have an Ape. They're like, oh, this PFP for $500, is it going to go up? Oh, yeah, I like this game. Okay, sounds good. Like, buy it, right? And then your collection sells out. So I think the high players are still very segmented from what we see today. And then games also have to make a decision, right? Do I go after the Web 2 high players and try to get them to Web 3, or do I just gear to the Web 3 high players, or do I try to get the Web 2 medium players? Like, what's my strategy here?
And I think if you look at the history of gaming, like the high players that you're talking about have been cynical the whole way through. Like when games started going free to play from being like $60 games to then being free, people are like, this will never work, this won't be a thing. Now look at it, like PUBG, League of Legends, these are some of the biggest games ever.
It's expected now.
They all play them. Yeah. So it's just like they're going to hate on it because they're just cynical by nature. So you just have to trust in the process and what you're doing is the right thing to do.
I think the problem a lot of the genuine game studios complain about is like Web3 high players are like almost pure economy players, right? Yeah. They'll just invest and they don't want to play the game, or they're like, this game looks cool and other people will play it, I'll buy this PFP. And the game studio's like, what are you even? Like, I don't know what to do with you.
And talking about different types of games, are there any games that you think are like a natural fit for Web3, or games that possibly won't be great in adopting game design?
Oh, for me?
Yeah, or for all of you, but...
I mean, we're a platform, so we're pretty neutral. We just accept the fact that we don't know how to design games, and we let other people do it. And I see a lot of evolution, which is pretty cool. So we recently have a partner called ETHXY, which is like a pure economy degen high player game, right? And it's literally you buy plots to showcase your PFP. Did really well if you look at Treasury, if you look at gameplay, like graphics, like complete shit, right? I was like, we don't really dictate, we just watch, and I think if I have anything interesting to say, I think it took 10 years to get free to play right. And I feel like it'll take 10 years to get Web3 game right. And we're probably like year 3 to 5 right now. That's my sense.
Yeah, I think the closer you are to an RPG style economy, the more effective it is. Because like, in effect, we're just emulating a real world economy. And if there aren't people trading between each other, if there isn't that natural demand for resources and that natural supply of resources coming from players playing the game, you're not going to have any formulation of a strong, like what people typically call a Web3 economy. If you don't have the RPG elements, you still have the trading of skins, the trading of various assets in the game that are more cosmetic, but just having that nature of there are resources that players need to consume, and there are resources that players can spend and trade between each other. That bolsters the argument that you have a strong, typical Web3 economy, but that doesn't mean that trading skins isn't a valid use case either.
I agree with that. I was thinking back every single time we're talking about what genre is a good genre for Web3, and I'm always coming back to MMORPGs as it's the reason I think why MMORPG players get what Web3 is about and what you could do with that. But I feel like at a higher level, if we look at any kind of Web3 blockchain games that exist now, and you have these components of community on Discord, the marketplace, the trading that can happen, like ultimately it's always coming back to being a sort of big MMORPG conceptually. This said, I don't know if I would ever suggest to anyone like, hey, if you want to get into Web3, build an MMORPG. MMORPGs, it's a huge kind of undertaking. So we've got a different approach, which is let's take a battle royale, simple session, based kind of game, and have a deep meta that relies in some ways on Web3 features. But definitely MMORPGs are like the main thing that comes to mind with Web3.
Do you think that Web3 forces games to rethink game design from the ground up, or is it possible, I guess, for a Web2 game to start integrating Web3 features later on down the line? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there is room for all of it. I mean, you can think you can be very native and think crypto and blockchain features first and kind of gamify that. That's totally doable. You can add Web3 features, which is kind of what we're doing on a more traditional type of game. In our case, we still thought about the design from day one. We were like, okay, well, how are we gonna use blockchain in our title? But I think you can make something. Of course, if the game is very mature, if you already have an economy in place, like this is going to be very hard to address. But I think taking any genre and trying to sort of match some Web3 feature with that and create an economy is probably possible.
Yeah, I think I agree. It depends on the depth of the integration that you're going for, and then also, as you said, depends on how mature your economy is. Because if you've existed for 10 years as an economy where people never trade between each other, you then suddenly have to introduce some kind of currency that people can buy and sell between, and some kind of set of assets that people can do that with. And it's is that just a whole new brand, or are you actually doing it with everything else? You start to sour the message, and you already have a large audience that enjoy exactly the experience that you have. So it's yes, you probably could do it, but should you? The answer is most likely no. I think most of the people you're going to attract with a Web3 style game and the things that it offers are a newer audience that aren't necessarily already existent in your game. So the risk of souring the ones that you already have just to acquire a new set of people isn't really worth it, especially with the time it takes to mature a peer-to-peer trading economy. It doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah, my sense is depending on what your goal is, there's a lot of pure economy play only games, right? And that's only a Web3 high player game, and Axie arguably is a high-low only game. So we've seen success there, but I think our goal is to bring the medium. So I feel for that type of experience, the Web2 bridge to Web3 is much better because there's a real game you can play. I think arguably Steppen was a great example of where you brought a good amount of medium players into this whole ecosystem. So something like that, I still think is a little bit better.
And for Web2 game studios that are thinking about integrating Web3, what are your thoughts on where should they start? What elements or features should they start looking at to integrate into their games?
Well, they should just use BlockUS. Jokes aside, I think the login wallet infra should be very seamless, wallet as a service for your Web2 players to just have a wallet without feeling it. I think the trading, most gamers are pretty familiar with the concept of buying, Introducing selling is a friction point, though. It's like a little bit of an education and brings hesitance. So I've seen interesting designs mostly revolve around that. So they would have an experience that's just like a Web 2 game until you get to maybe level 10 or level 40 or like full level, like even level 100, right? Then you unlock the Web 3 buy-sell element, and then you get introduced and educated on Web 3. So that's one way to go about it, to just minimize the cognitive load of playing a game, because it already takes a lot to love a game. So I've seen that as an interesting way of designing it, but I think there's a lot to be to consider there in terms of designing your game.
I think playing it safe is probably the best thing they can do. A lot of people, I think when they transition from Web 2 to Web 3, they're like, oh, there's so many things we can do. We can introduce a token, we can have everything, like do everything all at once. Like that's not really going to work that well, especially if you have a free floating token. Volatility is going to kill trading, and that's just going to kill the whole use case. So I think slowly opening up some kind of economy in a game, but designing it to do so. So for example, you might start with, hey, there's no peer-to-peer trading. And then you say, okay, now there's only trading between friends, now there's only trading between clans, and then slowly open it up regionally. Because if you mess something up, everyone's going to leave. Whereas it's a lot easier to fix things on a much more localized basis than it is on an entire macro basis, because that message to the whole audience just doesn't work. So yeah, I think the key message to them would be to take it slow and don't just jump in on the deep end, because you still need to learn how to swim. So
I completely agree with all the points that were made. One aspect for us that was really important into bringing maybe Web 2 players into a more Web 3 experience, or at least introducing a Web 3 experience to traditional gamers, is the sense of familiarity. So if we try to innovate too much, as you were saying, on too many fronts, people are lost. There's no angle for them to get into the game and sort of be like, oh, okay, I know how to approach that. So we've been playing it safe, as it says, like Web3 features are being introduced, much further down the kind of like the experience that gamers have. So they have a hook with the game itself. They come back for the game because the game is fun. There are retention features that work. We have good rewards, and then at some point, with the investment of time that they put into the game and the rewards that they're getting, they can start maybe trading those items or crafting higher level items and all of that. But that's only when they're ready to actually put in the kind of the effort to go through the friction that Web3 is right now. Wow, of course we're fixing this. All of us are, I'm sure, like working on a way to reduce the friction. But yeah, you want to have enough goodwill, on the side of players before you introduce something a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and I heard that you guys all mentioned about education, and what does that look like from your points of view? Is that like a gamified way of kind of educating people, or how are you guys going about that?
I think for us, like I'll touch on the user-generated content side for us. A lot of it is actually them teaching us what they want to see, and us also trying to relay back like how they can use those types of features in a AAA quality manner. Because we're there to help them build the game that they want to build and have the experience that they want to have. So like we're not necessarily correct. You see this a lot in most games. They release an update and then they might rescind it because it's just not what the players actually wanted. So the education for us goes both ways, where it's not necessarily a gamified experience. It's more of like an open format discussion where we can talk with our players, talk with our community, and be like, hey, what is it that you guys want? And then if we put that into practice in a way that doesn't necessarily suit them the best, we can then have a discussion of, hey, what went wrong? Do we need to actually take this back? Do we need to do something else? Like, what are the adjustments we can make? So I think for us that takes format in a discussion as opposed to necessarily any kind of other form of education. Then you'd hope the more mature players would pass that information down in a way that they feel is best suited. Like you have, very mature wikis, you have very mature YouTube kind of communities, and you hope they form around the fact that the openness of discussion and just people's passion, because we can go out and make content, but most of the time the content that the community makes to educate the community is better because they're the ones that have actually had the struggles. We're the ones that have sat there for thousands of hours designing the game, so we might miss the basic things that the community wouldn't. So I think that's how we're approaching it.
I feel like we rely a lot on our community in general. There's like a huge grade, do you say grade or gradation? I don't know. Like there's so many steps between a Web 2 gamer, a Web 3 native, and anything in between, like CryptoCurious and all of that. There's so much. And so right now we're working with the more native community side of things, and we're trying to understand, okay, what is going to make it a good experience for them first. That's like the first step. And then how are they going to help us onboard, maybe the CryptoCurious? Are they going to be, can we arm them with the right kind of explanations, maybe the tutorials, maybe you said, YouTube channel content, or anything that we have creators making very nice breakdowns on, here is how you can import and export your assets, in game. And this is definitely targeted at a non-crypto native audience. And that's very helpful. So it's like a very community-driven kind of education happening here. And I think what we're doing as well, which is not exactly education, but a way to sort of facilitate that, we try to create a lore, or we try to simplify Web3 terms. We're not talking about staking, for example. We're going to propose people to lock their assets away for rewards, and there is a terminal, and there is a whole story around that people can sort of understand. They understand the concept without having to understand what DeFi is. And similarly, we have a import and export feature in the game that allows you to bring your assets on chain. But we are not really talking about wallets and signing, transactions and all that stuff. It's just like, do you want to export your assets so you can trade them? They're collectibles. They're not NFTs, just collectibles. So just trying to make things, again, maybe a bit familiar.
Yeah, for us, our audience is game studios, not consumers. So I think a lot of our education is just like meeting them where they're at, and both on the technology front and on just explaining what this is all about. So on the technology front, I would say, like, even within the crypto community, right, there's a lot of maxis, or people who are a bit like arrogant in some sense, right? At first there's the Bitcoin maxis and there's the ETH maxis, and you're like, okay, you have a Unity dev, he's not going to code in Solidity, right? You just bridge that gap and build tools where they're at, like Epic Account Service or PlayFab, like these things that people actually use for a long time in the gaming community, like meeting them where they're at technology-wise. And then the second piece is like explaining the mindset, like a lot of the language as well, like meeting the game devs and studios where they're at. It's like, instead of a minimum guarantee, it's like, this is an investment into your equity, right? And instead of an IP licensing fee, this is what it is. And actually you get a token allocation, and then this is what you can and can't do with it. And it's just like a minimum guarantee. And this is how value, so it's like a lot of the translation of, actually this is a good deal and better than the publisher. You just have to understand it and don't be scared. So a lot of the work is there actually.
Cool, thank you. And as a final question, you mentioned user-generated content, and how much is user-generated content having an impact on game design or the direction of the games that you're creating?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people kind of don't understand, not don't understand, but don't realize from a high-level perspective is that, like, CS:GO is a game that was created from user-generated content. Like, that was Half-Life previously, and then you also have Dota, which was part of Warcraft. And like, these games have like huge longevity. Take Minecraft as an example as well, like Roblox. These games have lasted 10 plus years, some over 20 years, and they just keep getting more and more popular. So there's clearly like a connection between how long your game lasts and how user-generated content is integrated into that game and the experience itself. So I think that the key piece that it adds is longevity. Like, people are still trying to play games that are shut down, like Call of Duty World at War, because there's custom maps that people have made. It also takes a little bit of that cost away from the game developers themselves, because users can then go and make content as well. So I think that the only thing you have to do there to keep it fair is to reimburse them for their efforts. If they do generate you a lot of revenue, you should probably redistribute some of that back to them. But yeah, I think the key thing there is longevity, because you're allowing the users to make the experience that they want to have, as opposed to dictating it for them, which just adds this much deeper relationship and a much healthier player base.
I don't have a lot to comment on that because we don't have UGC in our title. But we've thought about it, and I think the conclusion that we came to is that it has to be designed with UGC in mind. It can't be something that you just add on later on. It's not meaningful enough. And it has to be designed from the ground up with that in mind.
Yeah, we think of it a lot as like the front-end UGC makers and the back-end UGC makers. So front-end UGC makers is like the people that make the assets and like come up with new maps and things like that, right? And we let the game studio take care of that because I think that's part of the creative process and have to fit in with the whole game. But we build a lot of the tooling for the back-end UGC people and tools. Like, so for example, we're incorporating ERC 6551, which is this ability to have an NFT as an account that holds other NFTs, which you can think of a lot of really cool gaming use case. Rental NFTs is another one. That's another primitive that lets you rent like an item or an account, and you can play it with certain permissions, right? And then there's dynamic NFTs, right? So a lot of crafting, that is definitely putting it on chain, making sure it's like resellable and the ownership is clear and all of that stuff. So we build a lot of those features so the front end UGC can just go as fast as your mind can imagine. So that's a lot of what we do.
Thank you very much for your insights. Great to have you on the panel, and thanks everybody for listening. Thank you very much.
Thanks.